What is going on YouTube? Gabmus here and welcome to the 15th episode of the Tech Pills weekly live stream. Let's jump right to the first news of today. KDE is working on a new TV interface with an AI voice assistant. So that's interesting. So the KDE team is expanding even more after starting the Plasma mobile project. They're now moving on to their next big thing, Plasma Big Screen, as they're calling it. Their plan is to create a sort of mix between Kodi and Android TV with a big button interface, integrated media apps, and a, lo and behold, AI voice assistant. That's something fancy. Anyway, they're planning on integrating the open source Mycroft voice assistant into the experience, providing an expandable skill system to perform different voice activated tasks. So since the interface for the GUI based actions for Mycroft is actually based on Qt and Kirigami, the extensibility should prove to be pretty easy on a KDE environment. Anyway, their plan here is basically to use, for the time being at least, the Google's speech-to-text engine by default, which of course is not ideal considering all the privacy concerns regarding Google services and the fact that they do collect anonymized user statistics. And by they, I mean Google. I'm not aware of KDE collecting anything at this point. Anyway, they're still building the whole thing with the possibility to switch to third-party speech-to-text systems, like for example Mozilla DeepSpeech. So they're initially going to support the Raspberry Pi 4 as their target platform, which makes a lot of sense to me since it's a very accessible and widely available small factor computer that many actually use as a media computer for their big screen TV. And they're also experimenting with supporting the HDMI CEC protocol to be able to navigate the interface using the remote control, the remote of a supported TV. So again, this is very interesting, and the fact that they're thinking about all of these details is really nice. It's really exciting news from KDE, and hopefully this evolves into being a full-fledged Kodi replacement, but still, at the same time, I'm also kind of worried for the amount of stuff that the KDE community is working on. To be clear, I don't have a realistic idea of the scale of the whole KDE community, but what I fear here is that between Plasma Desktop, mobile, and now big screen, that they might get overwhelmed at some point by the amount of stuff that they need to work on and maintain. So hopefully it's not the case, but the doubt still remains. What do you think, guys? Let me know in the chat. Also, if you have a Raspberry Pi 4, at this point you can already try out the beta build of the Plasma Big Screen. You just have to head over to plasma-bigscreen.org to set up the beta image for your Raspberry Pi 4 right now. So if any of you wants to try it out and see how it works, please let me know in the comments. I'd appreciate it. Moving on to the next news of today, a hacker stole some of the AMD intellectual property and it's asking for a big ransom. So apparently a hacker was able to gain remote access to a computer containing unencrypted files related to the AMD graphics intellectual property regarding the current Navi 10 architecture, as well as the newer Navi 21 architecture, for the rumored upcoming so-called Big Navi GPU from AMD. So this hacker apparently dumped some of these files on different repositories across GitHub, which is kind of funny that most hackers these days don't use Pastebin but GitHub. Anyway, following the MCA notice from AMD, these repositories should now have been deleted, but as it's often the case, you can't just delete something permanently from the internet. So those files are probably still out there around, and if you're very interested in looking at them, you're probably going to be able to find them. The hacker also stated that there's even more sensitive information that she wants to sell for around $100 million. Insert Dr. Evil meme here. Also, if no one is interested in buying this sensitive information, she said that she will release them publicly. So I don't know. This really feels like kind of a big ransom to me. AMD stated about this security intrusion that the files that have been stolen are, quote, not core to the competitiveness or security, unquote, of their business. So it's still a very problematic position to be in for a company, particularly for a company like AMD at this point in time. They've been the underdog for so many years now, and just recently they've been able to regain a place in the market, first in the CPU space with Ryzen, and now even in the GPU space they're being very competitive with the new Navi architecture with the 5000 series GPUs, and the fact that they are now possibly that some of their company secrets are now possibly exposed. I don't know how well this will go for them, but as an open source guy, I don't think that this will be too bad. I just really hope in my heart that this leaked information becomes public at some point, and AMD just rolls along with that and makes it possible for developers to make even better drivers and other software on top of the AMD GPU stack on Linux. This is, again, this is a possibility. Even if it's very far-fetched, I still hope that it will happen. Anyway, let me know, guys, what you think about this news about, again, AMD having been stolen some intellectual property. What do you think the consequences of this will be? Let me know in the chat or in the comments down below. Next news of today, Microsoft buys NPM. This is bad news, people. So if you don't know, NPM, or Node Package Manager, is the central and most used JavaScript code repository and package manager. It's widely used as the de facto standard in both server and client JavaScript development of any kind. And even myself, I've used it extensively for quite a lot of time. I'm not doing any JavaScript right now, otherwise I'd still be using it. Anyway, this makes me really think this new acquisition from Microsoft. My idea here is that I don't think really that Microsoft can do open source. I don't really think it's possible for them. They're only doing what they've always done best, and it's, if you can't beat them, just buy them out. and that's really sad to see from such a big company, and from a company in particular that has showed some interest to Linux and open source in the recent years. But as I suspected, this interest is actually mostly just to try and take the biggest chunk of the market, as they always want to. It all started, this mess, when with the acquisition of GitHub, and they can't just do what everyone else is doing out there. I mean, if a company wants to do something open source, they will just use one established platform and release the source code for whatever product that they're working on an established platform. Or what they can do is host their own instance of, say, GitLab or Git even, or they could even develop like their own Git web front-end thing. But no, they just can't do that. And in fact, they actually went out and bought GitHub for an enormous amount of money. And of course, now they own most of the open source code that's out there. Well, they don't own it, but they own the platform that's hosting it. So it's not a good situation to be in. And when this happened, many developers, myself included, switched to GitLab for their main code repositories. And unfortunately, I have to say that I still have to use GitHub in my day-to-day life, because there are some services, namely Flatpak or FlatHub to be more precise, that rely heavily on the whole GitHub repository system for continuous integration, deployment, and new releases. So I don't know if they have any plans, the FlatHub guys, to move to other platforms in the future. But as the situation is currently, I don't really like to be using GitHub, and I wouldn't like to be using npm from this day onwards. I mean, honestly, what I think is that if Microsoft wanted to compete in the open source industry, they could have created their own things, their own GitHub clone, their own npm clone, and called it a day. And they could have even gained a significant chunk of the market that way. But that wasn't enough. They just wanted the mathematical certainty to be able to be the first and the most used option out there, because they, at the end of the day, all they want is control over the masses. And with GitHub and npm, they have control over a very huge chunk of the web development ecosystem out there. What I hope to see here is a new npm alternative coming out from the community. I don't know if that's realistic, because it's really a big project and a big endeavor to take on, particularly for the open source community. I guess it depends on what the interest is on this. But anyway, I really hope an npm alternative comes out in the near future. And after all, when GitHub got both, as I was saying before, we saw already a massive migration to GitLab, so I can already see the same happening with npm. Let's move on to the next news of today. Wayfire, a new Wayland compositor inspired by Compiz. And this isn't really very much of a news by itself, but I just still want to talk about this and to let you know that this exists. So what am I talking about here? Wayfire is a sort of new window manager or Wayland compositor, because yeah, you heard it right, it's basically a Wayland desktop environment, if you want to oversimplify. And it has many great features. It takes inspiration from the now defunct Compiz compositor back in the old GNOME 2 days. It's actually been around for a little more than a year now, but it just recently got into my radar and I just wanted to talk about it. I played around with it a little bit today, and I definitely want to play around with it more. It's based on WL Roots, which is the compositor library developed by the Sway window manager project. So it's great to see that they're reusing some very popular code out there. And it has a lot of interesting eye candy, mostly fluid and smooth animations, including wobbly windows, blur, workspace cubes, windows that catch on fire, and a lot more. If you remember playing around with Compiz, If you're old enough to remember that, and if you were around when this was a thing in Linux, then you can definitely remember the feel of having like this crazy desktop with all of these useless but so awesome animations in your desktop. And Wayfire is trying to bring the same thing to 2020 on a modern stack based on Wayland. It's definitely an interesting and innovative project, and as I said, I already played around with it, and I just can't wait to play around with it more. All right, let's move on to the next bullet point of today. I won't call this a news. Developers and testing. So I've recently started a new course in my university called Verification and Validation of Software. Of course, I'm following this course remotely because of the current human malware situation. Anyway, this course is very interesting because it's mostly about automated testing and development. It's something that, so automated testing is, when you write a piece of software, of course, you have to test that everything is working right, okay? And what most, lazy programmers tend to do is test manually something. Like if I have a window and when you press a button, a pop-up comes up. What most lazy developers, myself included, typically do is they just test it out for themselves, and once they see that it works once, they never check it back. They just assume that it will always work. And automated testing is actually the opposite of that. What automated testing does is it's actually very self-explanatory, but you write programs that test your main program. So it's kind of a recursive situation, but there are some practices that let you write good tests that you do need more tests for, because the obvious question here would be, who tests the tests? But of course, if you write simple tests that are literally as simple as possible, not convoluted, and very straightforward, you probably don't need to test them. And this course, again, is mostly about automated testing in development, and it's something that we developers never like to do, writing tests in general. And with this course, I'm actually coming to like it quite a bit. The most important thing here that I wanted to talk about is test-driven development, which means writing tests before actually writing production code. Which, if you're not familiar with this practice, it's actually something that's very popular in like enterprise businesses, writing big software for big corporations. This is probably the most popular way of doing development. But it's not as popular for individual development, and I've not seen lots of automated testing in open source projects personally, particularly in smaller projects. And I think that it would really benefit any kind of project. The most important point that I wanted to touch here is that, think about it. If you're forced to write tests before the actual code, you're also forced to think about how the interface of the class or library or whatever you're going to develop should work from a user's perspective. And just a note, users here means developers using other developers' code, but they're called users in this scope. Another advantage is that it allows you to write cleaner code in a way. It's often tempting, to use some less elegant programming practices or dirty workarounds or terrible hacks, as we should really call them. But with test-driven development, this becomes less frequent, because once classes have a defined interface that already has a test that has to work, and it is supposed to work in a certain way, doing hacky things becomes actually more difficult because you are bound to the interface, and if you get out of the interface, you're breaking the test, and that you just can't move forward. Of course, you can change the test, but that's beyond the point. Anyway, what I wanted to say here, if you're a developer, even if you have like a project that didn't follow test-driven development, and I have, all of my open source projects don't follow test-driven development. So Anyway, if you have a project that you like to do something fancy with, try writing tests for it, even after the fact. It doesn't really matter. It's still very beneficial. I started to write some tests for my app feeds, and I've already found several parts of code that really could use some refactoring. So I'm really happy to have had the time to do this kind of, like, to play around with testing. And if you're a developer, or if you're starting to become one, I really suggest you give automated testing and test-driven development a serious try. I really think it may improve your workflow and overall the way you program and you code and the overall quality of your work. Alright guys, I think this is gonna wrap it up for today's episode. It was a short one, but anyway, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for following me live. If you like this video, please make sure to press the thumbs up button down there. Remember to subscribe to TechPills channel if you want more of this. Remember to join the TechPills community at techpills.technology/community. Oh, we have a question. Sorry. Okay, I think we can answer the question. Archie Bach says, do you know if the Arc theme found a maintainer? Yes, I actually talked about this in the last episode of the TechPills Weekly livestream. If you give me a second, I can just tell you the exact URL. All right, wait a second here. All right. So it's the active fork of the Arc theme is maintained by the GitHub user JNSH, and if you give me just 1 second, I'll link to the repository in a moment. And last comment is 2 days ago, so I think that's still being worked on, but you can check it out for yourself. Here you go. Of course, guys, I wanted to wrap this episode up, but if you have any questions, or if you want to interact and say something, you can just feel free to. And particularly like these live streams, I don't know if this was clear from the beginning, but anyway, the point of these live streams is really to be able to interact with you guys watching. So I'd really be happy to see more interactions from you, even if you just have like a wild thought about something that I'm talking about, or if you have any questions, you're always free to write them in the chat and we can talk about it. And it's a way to, I don't know, aggregate the community, if you want, to make some sort of log around the channel. We can talk about your questions, your problems that you're having. If you have, like, if you need some particular piece of software that you need in your work, on your personal life, and you need a suggestion or something else. Even we can talk even about programming. For what I can, I mean, to the extent that I'm able to answer you. I am a CAS, computer science bachelor graduate, so I can do some programming, and I'm doing the master degree right now. So if you're interested in the topic, I'm definitely happy to talk about it. I'm mostly interested in Python, so if that's your jam, I mean. But I think that's all for today's episode. Again, like if you liked, subscribe if you want more, join the community, techpills.technology/community. You can use the QR codes on the bottom. You can see them right here on the bottom. And I'll see you guys in the next one.